Hi developers, in this video we'll learn how to use Selenium to create UI tests for our web applications. After running the unit tests and the integration tests, now we need to run the UI tests for our web application. So what we do is that we launch the application in the browser, then we fill the entries, we click the buttons, and we make sure that the expected behavior is the actual behavior of the application. Our unit tests and our integration tests are done automatically because we encoded them, but the most part of the UI tests is done manually. It's a tester who will go and click the buttons and try to make sure the application behaves as expected. With Selenium, we can automate this task. As we automated the task of running the unit tests and integration tests, we can also automate the UI tests. So we'll have a driver or a robot that will launch the browser. It will type the URL, then it will launch our web application. After that, we'll go and fill the entries and click a button. Then we can make asserts to compare the expected behavior with the actual behavior. That's what Selenium does. So let's see a demo. Here I have a web application, and in each time I want to test the expected behavior of this web app, I need to go to create a new employee. Then I need to go and fill those entries right here. Then I need to click the create button. Then I check if that employee was added successfully to my list or not. And each time I deploy a new version of my application, I need to run or to go through this process again and again. And because it's a manual process, then maybe we can find a good solution to automate this process. And here where Selenium comes into play. With Selenium, we can automate those processes. Here I'm using Visual Studio and I'm using C# with Selenium, and here I have a sample test to test the web app. So let's go and run this test, then we'll go to explain what it does. Here I'll go to my test explorer, right click on the test, run selected tests, and here we'll see the magic of Selenium. So here it launches my Chrome browser, it launches the URL specified, it fills all the data, then it clicks the create button. It will run another test with some other data right here. It will click the create button, then it will check for the expected results and it will compare it with the results that it gets from the web app. And here it tells me my test passes successfully. And all of this was done automatically for me. I just launched this test and the robot or the driver will do all the rest for me. But how did we did that? So here through this test I'm using Selenium, and of course here this means we need to add the dependencies for using Selenium. Here I added the NuGet packages for my ASP.NET application, or for my unit test project, which is in .NET Framework, but also we can use .NET Core. If I go to Manage NuGet Packages, then here you see I have installed Selenium WebDriver, and also I have installed the WebDriver for Firefox, for Chrome, and also for Internet Explorer, if I want to use those. And here, of course, I have the MS Test Framework. Of course, we can also use XUnit or NUnit with Selenium. I'll continue with MS Test, and here I tell my my framework that this is a test. So for that, I'm using here a test method. Then here for the arrange section, I'll start the browser. Then I'll go and maximize the window. Then I'll navigate to the specified URL, which is specified here by my variable called website URL, which I have defined right here. After that, we'll wait for 3 seconds, just the time to open this web app. Then we'll start the magic right here. So we'll tell our driver to find the element called full name. So it will find this element by ID. Let's go back to our web app and let's see what that means. Here, if I go to create a new, which is under this URL right here, we can find that for each of those entries, we need a way to find those entries. So we have either the ID or the name to find those entries. If I right click, I go to inspect. Let's go and click right here to inspect exactly this element. Here you can see that this element have some properties, like here the ID and also a name for that element. And those are the properties that could help us to find the entry. In my code right here, I'm using the ID, but not also you can use find element by name, by tag name, by class name, by CSS selector, and here you have lots of options to find your elements. So I find the element by ID, which is called right here full name. You can note that here. After I find that element, I'll go and use the method sendKeys in order to write inside that entry. Here I'll go and write a string full name, which I have passed right here using the data row. So this means for the first test, it will write my name right here, Usam Dilai. And we'll do the same for the other entries. Here we have an entry for department, which have another ID called right here department. And the same for email, phone, address, and so on. So here I'll enter those data that I have specified inside my data row. Note that here each of those properties will be passed as the corresponding parameter right here. So the first one will be passed as full name, then the second parameter will be passed as the department, the email, the third one, and so on. After that, I'll go and act. And acting here is by clicking on the create button. But if we go here to the create button, we inspect it. Unfortunately, our button doesn't have neither an ID or a name. So how can we find it? Here we'll use its class name. And that's what we are doing right here. We are using the method find element. We'll find it by CSS selector. And we'll be looking for an element that have a class name called input.btn.btn default, which is here exactly this button. When we find it, we'll go and click on it using the click method. When we click on this button, we'll go to this index page that displays all the employees. And here it means redirection, so we need to wait for some seconds to go to that page. After that, we'll go to the assert section, where here we'll go and check the actual data compared to the real or to the expected data. So here I'll go and check for my page source. I'll go and check if my page source contains a full name, because in this list right here I have the full names, the employees that I have added, and I also have the department, emails, and so on. So I'll go and check if those employees that I have added was actually added to this table. So I'll go and check for that. So this is the basic of running Selenium tests. We go and launch the web app inside the browser. Then we fill the forms. We perform some actions like clicking on buttons. Then we check the expected behavior. But because those tests might fail, then we want to get some useful tools that help us to understand why it fails. And here, because it is UI tests, then it might fail because my page is not formatted as it should be. So the thing that might help me the most is to get a screenshot of my web app at the time where I am running the test. And here, that is what I am doing right here. I'll try to create a screenshot. Unfortunately for us, Selenium provides a tool to create snapshots or to create a screenshot. So here I'll tell the browser driver to create a snapshot. Then here I'll specify a file name, and then I'll go and save that screenshot inside inside the current folder in JPEG format. But here, note also you can use other image formats if you want to change that. Then I'm telling my test context, which is a property that I have created right here, to report this image. So here it will add that file name to the result tests. Now, because we run this test, then we'll find the images inside the current folder at the time of running the app, which is right here. It should be the bin folder. So if I go to my Selenium project, then here I click show all files, which will show the hidden files. If I go to bin to debug, then from here I can find that I have some images. Let's open this one, for example. And here we find an image that was taken during the execution of my UI test. And here you see all the data that we have entered for that employee. So those could help us to understand why our UI tests might fail. Sometimes it is the entry was not found, or it is the resolution of the web page itself. It could be anything. In this video, we'll learn how to run Selenium UI tests from a continuous deployment pipeline using Azure DevOps. Which is good about Selenium is that we can run those UI tests from our DevOps process. So let me switch here to go to Azure DevOps, where here I have created a CI/CD pipelines to run the UI tests. So let's start by the build pipeline. Here I have the build pipeline to build the web app, and also to build the database if I have one, then to copy the ARM templates. And here I have my Selenium UI test project, which is here a .NET framework project. So for that, here I'm using the MS build task in order to build the project. And before that, of course, I need to make sure that I have NuGet installed. Then I go and restore the NuGet packages so that I have all the dependencies needed in order to build the project. When building the project, I'll go and specify the out directory or the output for the binary files to be the build artifact staging directory, so that after that I can publish this folder directly to be available from my CD pipeline. And from my CD pipeline right here, I'll go to the dev environment, for example, where here I have 6 tasks. So the first task will be deploying the RM template to create the infrastructure for my application, then deploy the web app, deploy the database, and after that we'll go and run our UI tests, because here we have the web app already ready and running. So we want to run some UI tests against our web app. For that, right here we are using the task vs test. Of course, you can add this using this icon button. You'll go and look for vs test, and here it is, our task that I'm using right here. So I configured this task as following. I'm giving it a name, then here I'm specifying the test files. I tell it to look for any DLL that have the name test in it. Then I'm telling it to search inside the default working directory. Then after that, here I'm specifying this settings file, which is called right here run settings. What is run settings? Here, if I go back to my project, you might notice that here I'm using this line of code, and I'm getting a parameter or a variable called web app URL. That one comes from a file I have right here, which is run settings.run settings. This is an XML file that defines some settings for my test called test run parameters. Here I'm defining a parameter called web app URL, and here I'm specifying the name for my web app. This is useful because when we test locally, then I might test my application running in localhost. But because here I have deployed my application into a public URL, then I'm no longer using localhost, but I'm using a public URL, so I might want to change that setting. And here I have configured my test to take into consideration the change of that environment variable. So here I'll get whatever environment variable defined inside my run settings. And we can override this value from the CD pipeline. Here, when we go to the CD pipeline, we can see here we have the option for override test run parameters. And here I'm specifying the same name I have used inside that XML file with the new value, which is the web app name URL. Here I have defined this variable right here, which will take the name of my web app inside Azure. So with that, I'm sure that my tests will run against my web app hosted in Azure. After the UI tests will run successfully, we can see that from the results right here, we can go to check the logs or to check the tests right here, which will open this window for me. And here we can see that our test passes successfully. And in addition to that, we can go to test results, where here we can find our method create employee that we have defined. And here we can find the attachment, which is here the image that was created during the running of the test. So if I click on it right here, we can find this image, which was the exact image that we saw earlier for running the UI tests. So what we saw in this video is the basics of creating UI tests, but there is a lot more to discover. So if you are interested here for ASP.NET Core, for example, you can go to this link right here to get more details about running Selenium in .NET applications. And of course, Selenium doesn't run only on .NET, it runs also on Java, Node.js, anything that is JavaScript. And from the seleniumhq.org you can find here more details about how it works. And if you want to get the source code for the application that I have showed you today, then you can find it publicly hosted on GitHub. I hope you liked this video, and thank you.